Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Canada and the United States, a debate that has long been up for decision to each person. Which one is best? Well, that's what we're taking on today. And why are we talking about this? Because it may kind of seem random, but part of where it's come from is over the last 2 years, Lance, or really, I mean, you could go all the way back to 2016. Every time that a conversation about Bernie Sanders comes around or socialism, inevitably the discussion, especially amongst young people, is, I want to go to Canada, right? Because it'll be better to live there than in the United States. And today's question is, well, is that true? What would make it better? And we're going to look at not only the statistics between the two countries, but also the larger question of, is America really a good place to live? Or do we just think that it's a good place to live? To find out, you'll have to listen to the entire episode because you'll get our verdict at the end. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on America versus Canada without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, for me, it goes back further than Bernie. It goes back into the late 60s and early 70s. A few young people in the United States were choosing to leave the United States because of what they thought was the unjust fighting in Vietnam, and went and moved to Canada and left behind their families because they did not, they left on negative terms with the government, and then dealing with that throughout the 1970s, if they were going to be allowed to come back into the United States or not, and if they were going to face any kind of punishment for leaving the country because they were wanted for the military draft or for protesting the fighting in Vietnam. So this has been something that since my very youngest days that has been on the minds of some Americans. The word of the day today is the word emigrate, E-M-I-G-R-A-T-E. So not immigrate, but emigrate. And it means to move away, to leave one country or region to settle in another. And that's what we're talking about. Someone who would choose to leave the United States and go to Canada, or a Canadian who would choose to leave Canada and come to the United States would be emigrating. E-M-I-G-R-A-T-E.
Well, Lance, let's get the conversation started. What we're going to do here in the first segment is get into some of the core statistics, right? The basic things you got to look at with both countries. In the second segment, we'll take on the two big ones, or two of the ones that I think have more to dive into, and that's gun laws in Canada versus the United States, and also healthcare. Obviously, the big one in the United States versus Canada, and kind of understanding those two things. And then in the third segment, you'll get our verdict about where is better to live. And I'm sure that will be different for each of us. But first and foremost, I think we have to start at the very top level and talk about government, right? We have to mention that at the very least, that these are not the same types of government. And so we'll turn to Devin, our producer, as he is a big fan of all things Canadian. What type of government does Canada have? Do you know?
Actually, I am not very familiar with their government. I know like a very tiny bit, but it's not even worth trying to put together because it's not valuable, and it probably wouldn't even make any sense.
That's fair. I'm not sure, and we do have a number of Canadians that listen to our show, so thank you all for tuning in today. Always appreciated. And perhaps you want to send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, and see if you get the answer correct. But the correct answer, per the laws in Canada, which identify its system of government as a constitutional monarchy. Most people do not understand, but Queen Elizabeth is the Queen of Canada. And everything that happens in Canada, all the laws that are passed, require royal assent of Her Majesty. And it is Her Majesty's government, and passports are issued in Her Majesty's name. Now, It's something else important to note, a big difference, one of the sizable differences that I think Americans don't necessarily think about is, and again, it's not necessarily good or bad, just we are used to electing the president. Well, in Canada, you don't get to elect the prime minister. The way that works is the House of Commons basically elects the prime minister. It's a little more complicated than that, but avoiding a Lance Jackson history and social studies lesson here. That's the top line. But what about life expectancy, Lance? We care about that, right? So United States, 78.5 years versus Canada's 81.9 years, 82 years. So you might not live quite as long in the United States, but it could be worse.
When I read those numbers, the thing that comes to mind and always has is that it's not the quantity of life, it's the quality of life.
Ooh.
So in those last 3 years, if you are still active and able to go and do, read, whatever the things are that interest you, then of course you want those 3 extra years or 2 extra years, whatever the math is there. Devin is our math whiz. But the whole point is, number of years to me has never really mattered. Am I going to be able to do the things that I enjoy and that make me happy and that make those happy around me? So I never have really given a lot of credence to that, good, bad, or otherwise. If somebody says, hey, you're going to live to be 100, but after 80, you're going to kind of just sit in your chair and you're not going to be able to read and you're not going to be able to interact with young people and
then it's not necessarily worth it.
Then it's not necessarily, I'm not sure I want to be around. But that's very personal.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't feel that way. They want to live as long as they can. I've never been one in that court.
You mentioned quality of life, and that's a big one. And that's in the second segment as well. I knew I forgot one, kind of important, quality of life, because at the end of the day, we're going through these numbers and I think they're important, but that's a big question. The other thing is just to note the data that we're referencing is the most recent data available when possible from respective government agencies. When not, it's from reliable sources that have done independent measurements. So that would be nonprofits or other organizations that have a track record of completing these and provided comparable data. The other thing is all dollar figures are in United States dollars. We're not mixing Canadian and U.S. dollars. So anytime there were Canadian figures provided, they were converted to United States dollars so that it was an accurate comparison. Median household income, Lance, 68.7 thousand USD for the United States, 68.8 thousand USD for Canada. So really no remarkable difference there. Now, this other one, because there's two different ways to think about, money in a country, median household income and GDP per capita. Okay. So in median household income, Canada edges by the United States by like a whopping $100. But in GDP per capita, the United States is at 65,000 per citizen versus 46,000 per citizen in Canada. And here's another two that favor the United States. They're not necessarily good or bad things. They're just things where the United States statistic is higher that I thought was kind of surprising. In a nation where access to higher education, you would think would be more affordable and more attainable, actually more Americans have college degrees than Canadians do, 4-year bachelor degrees, just to be clear, because Canada does have the USB in vocational degrees. But in college degrees, 36% of United States citizens hold a bachelor's degree or higher. 28% of Canadian citizens hold a bachelor's degree or higher. Last, but certainly not least here, is median house price. Okay, so what does it cost to own a house? And this might shock some people because if you're not intimately familiar with the operations of Canada versus the United States, you might assume that in a country that is 1/9 the size of the United States, that homes would be cheaper. In fact, the opposite is true. In the United States, the median home price is $285,000 versus $415,000 in Canada. So if your dream is to own a home, Canada may not be the place to do it. Just depends on what type of home you won, I guess, Lance. So what are those stats? What stands out to you?
When you're talking about 1/9 the size of the United States, you're talking about the population.
Correct.
Right. Because if people look at a map, I just want to make that clear. I mean, you and I had talked about that. We knew that. But for the listeners, they're going to say, wait a minute, Canada's huge. They've got all kinds of land.
In Canada, they have a population density of 4 people per square kilometer. And in the United States, you have about 92 residents per square mile. So now kilometers and miles, obviously there's a conversion there. But the point, to Lance's point, the United States has 320 million people, and we're not very densely packed relative to the rest of the world, versus Canada's only 37 million people. So about 9 times larger, 8.7 or something.
But the boss of my house likes to watch HGTV, and I put Justin onto the track of looking up homes.
Yes.
Because when they redo homes and look for homes in Canada compared to the United States, the thing that pops out just anecdotally watching was, my gosh, living space is expensive in Canada compared to the United States. And you talked about price, but you didn't get into square footage. And as a purveyor of HGTV, square footage is everything when you're looking at a place to live. So those homes are expensive, and they're not very big compared to U.S. standards, or rental properties as well.
Yes.
So that's the one thing that sticks out from that whole thing, because it's just to me, living spaces is much more expensive in Canada than it is in the United States.
Yeah, I was going to say, anecdotally, having been to Canada a number of times, having once been engaged to a Canadian citizen, I remember the first time I went to visit family in Canada, and I guess I sort of was under the impression that these people didn't have very much money because the house was not very big. I mean, it was a 3-bedroom house, so it wasn't tiny, but relative to 3-bedroom houses in the United States, it was actually connected to, the other houses. In other words, they all shared walls in this neighborhood, and they were there were no like sizable yards or anything like that. They had, little backyards and stuff. And, and I thought, man, they must not be making very much money, which is fine. And then I found out what they made, and it was like, wow, that, you're either really saving on your housing costs here, or housing costs a lot. And it's the, course latter, not the former there. It's that housing is so expensive. It was very nice inside, but it was very small relative to what you would imagine when I understood what they had paid for it.
If people know the term a row house, that's probably where you were, the big in the East Coast and in metropolitan areas, because what you do is you have a house, but you jam it right up against the other one. So there are no side yards. You have small front yards and usually small backyards. But you are putting as many houses on a piece of property as possible. So you share side walls, but it's not an apartment. You go inside and it's a full house, but it's not necessarily on a lot of land, nor is it extremely large or spacious like we think of here in the United States.
Well, we've got a lot more to talk about. Big differences between the United States and Canada. So far, it's kind of a mixed bag. These stats don't necessarily give us a clear picture, but let's talk about the big issues. Guns, healthcare, and quality of life. Those are still to come. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
In the wake of mass shootings over the past number of years, it's been an issue Lance and I have addressed on numerous occasions. The right to bear arms in the United States, one that sets us apart from a lot of the world in many respects, but not so much from our Canadian counterparts. In most cases, if you are a Canadian and you wish to own an assault rifle, you can do so. However, and this is the big caveat here that we get into, the process to own one of those weapons is far more stringent and far more complicated than it is in the United States. The other very large and notable difference, Lance, is that in Canada, you are not allowed to modify guns. Okay. Now, what do we mean by modifications? We're not going to go into the specifics, but generally, like, for example, bump stocks. That's illegal. you cannot modify a weapon from its base of when you purchased it. So some of those types of things you don't have legal access to in Canada. So if you want a gun, basically you can have one. There are less guns in Canada, but obviously Canada is also substantially smaller than the United States. So generally speaking, it is more difficult and there is more process to go through to own a weapon in Canada than it is in the United States.
Bottom line, though, the weapons are the same. I mean, you can get everything. Yes, they have a few more measures in place to make sure it doesn't get in the hands of someone who maybe has negative motives. But the bottom line is they still exist and they are there. So you're not going to Canada to get away from guns. If you think they do, quote, a better job of gun control, they might in that they have more hoops to jump through than we do in the United States, but the access is the same and people still own them. So I'm not sure that that's a big selling point to those people who say, well, I'm going to Canada because they have tougher gun laws. They may have, quote, tougher laws, but they don't outlaw things from happening. And it doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, well, it's illegal to do this. Doesn't mean that it's not possible to do that. You know, and I took that in the article that's referenced in the show. The one guy said, well, you know, we have a law here that you can't transport it any place but from your home to the shooting range, where that's the only place you're allowed to shoot it. Okay. If I'm thinking of committing a crime or a mass shooting, I'm not too sure that law is going to stop me. Now, it sounds good. And it's like, see, we're tougher on gun, but what does that really do? You know, I mean, bottom line. So is there a big difference between the gun laws in here in Canada? And again, I'd love to hear from listeners.
How do they get to us, Lance? How do they tell us?
How do they get to us?
If they want to tell you what they think, how do they send us an email?
They type it on their phone or on their device. They send it to the link.
And what's the email address?
Here at True Chat.
What's the email address? podcast@thestateofus.org.
That's what I was going to say, but you
interrupted. It's super easy,
me.
Folks. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah.
Very sorry.
podcast@thestateofus.org. There it is, right?
Yes.
See, I was going to say that. So, you know, Bradley can cut out whatever part of that he wants. But I was going to say, you know, podcast@thestateofus.org. I just wasn't given the opportunity to say podcast@thestateofus.org. So I really don't see a difference here with gun control.
Yeah.
I don't know how other people feel, but that's my take.
I think Canada definitely is more strict, but to your point, if you're motivated, if you want one, you can probably still get one. Yes, there is less gun violence in Canada. But again, that's one of those where it's really difficult because if you just cite those stats out of context, Canada again is 1/9 the size of the United States. So the United States, I mean, theoretically speaking, should have more gun violence and not that there should be any ever, but my point is we have more population. So it would make sense. It's not good. It's a bad thing. We should do more about gun violence, but again, not a huge difference there. If that's what you're trying to get away from, Canada's not necessarily the place to go. You're not gaining a lot. The next one though, healthcare, this is the one at the forefront. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, but one of the main reasons that you cited would be a determining factor why Canada would most interest you is the access to universal health care.
Yeah, that is one of the things that interests me the most, or is really the most enticing. But honestly, it's always kind of like just been a dream to move there. I don't know. I've always kind of wanted to go there.
So Canada's health insurance, because I think, and this article, folks, that we have linked today really is good. It's not very long. It's a quick read. And it's entitled, What I Learned as a Canadian Reporting on Healthcare in America, and What Americans Can Learn from Canada. So it's really interesting. You have a Canadian reporting on American healthcare and sharing kind of his insight. This is also a Canadian that came to, if you're in the United States, we would say college. If you're in Canada, they would probably say university, but went to higher education and received his bachelor's degree here in the United States. And he notes, it is true that in Canada, every person has healthcare coverage, but not all costs are covered by the government. Private or employer-based insurance pays for dental visits, eye care, and this is not his quote, but by far and most notably, prescription drugs. This has been a forefront of Canada's debate recently on their healthcare, is that in Canada, yes, you can go to the doctor, and no, you will not receive a bill for that. If your doctor gives you a prescription, you do not have insurance to pay for those prescription drugs. Prescription costs are lower in Canada because the government plays a bigger role in negotiating and setting those prices with drug companies. But that is a really big caveat, and one that Canadians continue to wrestle with and debate if they want that to change. So I think that's pretty interesting. The other thing that's notable is, and he points this out, while you can't exactly compute what Canadians pay for health insurance because it's not like they get a bill for it. It's part of their taxes. Generally speaking, most sources would point to Canadians pay somewhere between $6,800 and $7,000 a year per person for healthcare, where in the United States, the cost is well over $10,000 a year per person. So healthcare costs are lower in Canada, although as to whether or not what you're going to pay for prescription drugs depends a great deal on who you work for and also how many prescriptions you have.
The other part of that article that you didn't mention that was important to me is that just because you go to the doctor or the healthcare clinic and you're not given a bill doesn't mean that Canadian health insurance is free.
Right.
They pay a lot higher amount in taxes to have that right. And so that's a misnomer. Well, I'm going to Canada because insurance is free. It's not free, folks. There's nothing in life that's really, truly free. You're going to pay something for it. And when it comes from the government, it usually means you pay for it in the form of higher taxes. So, and as the article pointed out, in Canada, much like the United States, people who make more money pay more in taxes. So the rich people are supplementing the poorer people in Canada for their health care. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just, let's put it out there. Okay. It's not free. It is paid for by the taxpayers, and the people who make more money pay more in taxes and pay for those people who can't afford to pay it. So, that's again, go in with your eyes wide open. Don't go in thinking that, well, it's free. It's not free. And there are costs involved, and it's paid through taxes. The other point is when you talk about being cheaper, that population makes sense as to why it might be cheaper as well. The argument could be made, since the United States has more people, we have more people who need high healthcare costs to take care of them. So therefore it drives up our price. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Canada's healthcare is better or even cheaper. It just means if you don't have as many people involved in the system, the likelihood of having those people that it takes a lot of money to keep alive isn't as great.
Yeah.
Which could lower your costs as well.
I think that the part of the point that Lance is getting at here, and something that he and I discussed before the show, is there are benefits to being a smaller country. And Canada does, I think, a very good job overall on capitalizing on many of those. And for example, healthcare is one of them. You know, again, adjusted so that they're both in USD, Canadians spend $6,604 in taxes for healthcare coverage. And where Americans spend more than $10,000 per year on their health care. So, you know, again, yes, it's cheaper right now, but also you have to take to note what's not in there. And I think here's the biggest caveat in my mind, Lance, that we all struggle to remember with this healthcare debate. And this is not saying Canada has figured out how to capitalize on a lot of things. For example, military spending. We didn't go over this, but it's not even remotely close to what it is in the United States. I mean, we're not even in the same universe. You know, Canada greatly benefits from its proximity to the United States, because generally speaking, if Canada was attacked, it's basically attack on the United States because we share our largest border with them. You know, I mean, it would be foolish for the United States to not pay attention if Canada was invaded. You know, that would be a problem. And Canada has done a good job of remaining close allies with us and making good use of our massive military spending to their benefit. Likewise, one of the reasons that their healthcare costs are able to be lower, they don't spend the type of money on healthcare innovation that the United States does. Yet they benefit from the research that's done in this country for their healthcare. So, and that's the way it is for what it's worth around lots of parts of the world. Often American innovation in healthcare is what then makes it possible for these other countries to keep their healthcare costs low because we spend all the money on the research and they benefit from purchasing that technology at a lower cost. And Americans saddle the brunt of those costs. So yes, we have issues with big pharma here and issues with health insurance and the for-profit industry. And Lance and I have discussed on many occasions the potential efficacy of moving or providing some form of national healthcare system. But it is important to note there's a lot of caveats here that say, and this is kind of what we're going to talk about coming up, quality of life and the idea of what would happen if 12%, just 12%, that's not that many. What happened if 12% of the United States population moved to Canada? What would happen to Canada? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Canada has a population of 37.59 million people. And if 12% of Americans moved to Canada tomorrow, we would effectively double Canada's population. And the effect, while not exactly sure, would almost certainly collapse the Canadian economy within a couple of years' time. So one important note in all of this, folks, is it okay if a few hundred, a few thousand, or maybe even a couple million Americans move to Canada? Yes. If 12% of America or more, or really even probably 5% of America or more moved to Canada, you would cause major issues for Canada. Forget about the United States. It would be a big problem. Canada does an excellent job at capitalizing on its position as a relatively small country in terms of population, doing a very good job of serving the people it has, and utilizing everything that is at its disposal, which includes a very close and warm alliance with the United States of America. That isn't to say that Canada is bad, because again, they're doing an excellent job of capitalizing on these things. And perhaps the thing that speaks to that the most, Lance, quality of life. There's a lot of different ways to measure this, but we've turned to U.S. News and World Report, which uses a couple different nonprofits that measure this and provide insights to, for example, the United Nations. So we tried to go with a relatively reliable, consistent source of ranking information. And Canada consistently, at least for the past several years, ranks number one in the world for quality of life, compared to the United States' 15th place ranking. Is that what it comes down to, Lance? I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, all this stuff we've talked about, all these caveats, right? If you're talking about, I'm Devin and I want to know where to live, don't I just care about quality of life? And I guess I could let Devin can answer that as well, because maybe I shouldn't ask Lance to answer for him. But isn't that what it comes down to, though, Lance? Is how good is your life going to be?
I think, but see, it's a philosophical question. And my philosophy is your life is as good as you want to make it. Now, people would argue and say, well, but there are things that are stopping me. Okay. And then you have to look at, do you need to then immigrate? Is that really going to make things better? You know, there's that old saying, my grandma's, the grass is always greener on the other side. Once you go, you may find out that things aren't as good as what you thought they were, that there might be some stumbling blocks, maybe even the same stumbling blocks that you're facing where you are. So you need to just hunker down and work through it and do the best you can with what you have where you are. And that's just kind of my philosophy. So when I look at quality of life, yes, there are things, and I get it. I understand sociology. I've studied it, that there are things that if I were of a certain age or certain demographics here in the United States, I might be looking to move. But there's an old saying, it's not that old, but from the Vietnam War time when I was alive, people would say, well, this is America, love it or leave it. And I remember even in my teenage years saying, you know what, but there are things about my country that I don't like, and I'm not going to leave it. I'm staying here because I do love it, and I'm going to make my country better. I'm not going to run away just because there's a problem or an issue about something that I don't like or that I don't agree with. I'm going to stay here because in America, I have the opportunity to work to make those changes to make it the country that I want it to be. That's what's going to keep me here. The only thing that would cause me to immigrate is if my family left, because that's what's important to me. You're talking about quality of life. If I didn't have my girls, my wife, my brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, if they all decided to up and leave, then I would leave because that's the important thing for my quality of life. That's the way I'll answer that question. I'll leave time for you and Devin to say something.
I think it's a good answer. And that's the interesting thing, right, about quality of life. There's a lot of how do you measure that? Well, in this instance, they take a lot of factors into component. Longevity, right? Quality of longevity, as Lance pointed out at the beginning of the show. As we've talked today, Canada wins in life expectancy. Canada wins in median household income. The United States wins in college attainment, 4-year degrees. Canada wins in vocational school completion and certificates. Median house prices, the United States wins. GDP per capita, the United States wins. Healthcare, Canada wins. So that's, I guess, the point of today's show, I think, is more to illustrate to people that the United States and Canada are very different countries and very different in terms of size. And yet, statistically speaking, there's not a great difference in terms of what each regular citizen in each country is capable of. The safety net programs, your health insurance, those are the ones where you're going to see the biggest difference. And those are the ones that I think are the ones that a lot of people look at for quality of life. And so I guess my question then to Devin is, you've seen all these stats today. Did any of it surprise you, good or bad? And what are your contemplations as we've gone through today's episode and talked about some of these statistics, things that stuck out to you that were surprising one way or the other?
Well, I had no idea about their gun control laws, and I thought that was very interesting. Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but as you mentioned, but earlier, and you and Lance talked about, it's not 100% effective, and there's always going to be issues there. But really, and just the aspect of quality of life, after looking at the articles, I don't really think much has changed for me. Nothing else has I've already researched a good amount of this information, so I kind of had a little bit of a base knowledge of this stuff, but so nothing really to change my mind on wanting to move there in the future. But I did actually look into Canadian healthcare as well, and when I found out that they didn't have dental or vision, I was just well, that's kind of weird. That's health related, but I mean, you gotta cut costs somewhere, I guess. So, I would like to see if maybe that could ever be 100% full coverage in any country. I don't know if it is. I haven't really checked, but that'd be a cool benefit.
I guess I would say to any of our listeners listening to the show, I would hope that our American listeners, I guess I'll put that any non-Canadian listeners to today's program, I would greatly encourage that you to take an opportunity to visit Canada, because I'm glad that I've been there a number of times in my adult life and as a kid, and it's a place I'm sure that I will visit many more times in my life. I think it is one of those, especially if you have the opportunity to really get into a good conversation with a Canadian. I've always found it rewarding and enjoyable. And it always provides good perspective. And I think that more than anything is what the episode today is about, is providing that perspective. We share a close bond with Canada, and we have for a lot of Canada's history. And I think that it's a great thing, because we're fortunate that we don't live in a part of the world where, the countries on our borders are looking to threaten us and looking to hurt us, because in many parts of the world, that is the case. And thankfully, we're not in that situation in our country. So I guess I wanted to say that I think everybody should take an opportunity to do that. It's much easier for a United States citizen to visit Canada than it is for a Canadian to visit the United States, because that's how we are. We didn't get into that part of things, but generally speaking, it's much easier for us to go there. So I guess where it comes down for me is, that as far as the verdict goes of which is better, I think one of the articles that we have linked today sums it up really well. The answer depends a lot on what you want from life. If you intend to have a sizable family, Canada may very well be a better choice for you. If you want to own a home, if you want to be able to vote for that's kind of tricky, the most powerful person in your government or the leader of the government, then maybe the United States is the place for you, right? Home ownership. Especially if you're going to work in like medical research or innovation, or if you're going to work in higher education, all of those things you probably are going to do better if you're in the United States. While if you're just looking to have kids, you're not necessarily wanting to own your own home and you want to rent. And universal health care coverage is important to you, especially if you have a lot of pre-existing conditions or history of, a lot of healthcare needs in your family, then Canada's probably the better choice. So I guess for me, I come down kind of on the side of where Lance is at. Well, I guess I don't know that Lance is in this place. I'm not necessarily sure that I would say the United States is better than Canada. I think the United States is different in a lot of ways than Canada. And I look forward to trying to continue to make those changes in our country. I think much the way that Canadians look forward to making those changes in their country. They're having big debates over healthcare right now and lots of other things, just like the United States is having big debates over things. So, yes, we're different, but in many ways we're, I think, a lot alike as well.
Good answers all the way around. So hopefully that you fit somewhere in to one of those, or if your answer is different than that, you can let us know at podcast at thestateofus.org,
Send us an email, right?
There you go. Yeah, send us an email. Let us know how you feel, because that's what we've done today is we've had this conversation among the three of us about whether or not to emigrate to Canada. And we've laid some things out there and we've spoken from our hearts and had our honest, open, and respectful conversation that we here at True Chat try to have with every show, because it's part of our mission statement. And we hope that it's educated you as well. And if you enjoyed this conversation and you share it with others and they say, well, this sounds like something I would like to listen to and join in this conversation, then let them know that they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is a syndicated radio program and a podcast. The podcast is released Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. East, so be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. And if you listen to the radio version, we're heard in select talk markets around the country. If your local talk station doesn't already have The State of Us, call them up and tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you to all of our listeners in the United States, Canada, and everywhere else in the world that you listen. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.